In this video, I wanted to go over scaling as well as how to create plans and sections from SketchUp for Schools. So to get started, if you look at my model, it should be at full scale. So for instance, if I draw like a 1 foot line, make it 1 foot, you can see that looks fairly realistic here. So what I'm going to do with that 1 foot line, I'm actually going to draw it. It's not just a demo piece here. I'm going to draw it as a reference, and I can use that then to scale my entire model, because the scaling function, when you export it in SketchUp for School, doesn't really work. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the tape measure tool now and actually scale this whole model down to the scale that we want. And so what I'm going to do with the tape measure tool is click on the bottom of that 1 foot line, then move up and click on the top of it. It doesn't look like anything happened, but now what I can do is I can set the length of that line. So I'm going to type in 1/8 and press enter. At the top it says, do you want to resize the model? I'm going to say okay. Now you might freak out here for a second because it's like, well, where did my model go? But you can see it's over here. If you ever lose your model, by the way, just do Shift and Z and it will zoom to fit. So now what I've done is I've rescaled my model. So if I use the tape measure tool and click once there and then hover, that line that was 1 foot is now 1/8 of an inch, which corresponds with 1/8 scale. So I can go ahead and erase it and we're good to go. I find that 1/8 scale is a pretty good scale to work with because I can always go up and down. If I need to, I can go down to 1/16 or up to quarter or up again to half if I need to. But 1/8 scale is a pretty good sort of average scale, let's say. So the next step is to change my camera type. We've been working in perspective, and I would recommend that you work in perspective when you're modeling. But when it comes time to doing a plan, section, elevation, or an isometric, we want to change our camera type. So to do that, we're going to go over here to the scenes icon, click on it. And up here I have my camera controls and camera positions. So on the left, these are my two camera types. So this top one is perspective. You've probably been working in that mode. I'm going to go ahead and click the bottom one, which is parallel projection. So again, this is going to be useful for any orthographic drawings. Next, I need to create an actual plan. And to do that, I'm going to come to my tape measure tool, click on it, and hit this middle icon. This middle icon is going to create a section plane, which you can see is snapping to different dimensions depending on what surfaces I'm hovering over. So if I hover over a horizontal surface, it gets a blue section plane. If I hover over this vertical surface, which is going, let's say, left and right, I get a green, and that's going to correspond with that green dimension. And if I hover over this left face, it's going to correspond with the red dimension. Since we're doing a floor plan, I'm going to hit the up arrow and lock it in the blue plane. That way it's not snapping to any of the surfaces, and I can fine tune exactly where I want it. So that looks pretty good for right now. Don't worry if it's not perfect, we can always adjust it. So you can see once I create that section plane, it cuts through the entire model. Now, what I would recommend that you do prior to doing all this is actually create some context. So you can see I've created some additional shapes down here, some additional forms, as well as a pretty thick ground, and you'll see why that'll matter not only in this plan but also more so in the section. So it's cutting through the whole model. If I click on any of these sort of dark gray areas, it'll select the section plane. If I click out, I can also come out here and just click and drag over the section plane as well. Now I can switch to the move tool and I can actually adjust and fine tune the exact height that I want this plan to cut at. So this structure is a 2-story structure, so ideally you would have 2 plans for what we're going to do. I'm only requiring 1, but I could cut through level 1, let's say somewhere around here, or I could move it up to level 2 and cut through somewhere around here. Now there's a couple rules when you're cutting a plan. The first thing is you want to try to avoid cutting through any horizontal elements. So for instance, I have this floor plate here, this floor slab, and it's kind of floating. So if I move my cursor down, you can see that at some point I can actually cut into that. And I definitely want to avoid that because it's giving the appearance that it's sort of a solid, really thick wall. So you never want to cut through any horizontal elements if you can help it. Now, there are some exceptions to that. So for instance, this structure is actually cut into the ground. So if I were going to do a first floor plan, this would be acceptable to cut through the surrounding ground areas to show that it is underground. But for the level 2 stuff, which is what I'm going to do, I'm going to move it up somewhere in here. So the second thing I'm looking for is I don't want to cut through any sort of handrails if I can help it as well. So you can see I have these handrails over here. And so right now this might look acceptable, but you want to try to cut above your handrails if possible. So handrails are about 3 feet tall at their top here. And generally your floor plans are going to be cut at about 4 feet. So I'm going to cut it, let's say there, we're cutting through the Apple logo. I think that'll be kind of nice. So now that I have my floor plan height set, I now need to change my camera position. So this is in a 3/4 isometric view. So I'm going to hit this middle button over here in my scenes to go to a top view. And right now you can see it's zoomed in. That's okay. I'm just going to scroll out and adjust my camera position. Now, once you have your camera position set, I would just recommend that you only zoom and pan, right? Because as soon as I orbit, it's no longer a true plan. This is more of a isometric plan. So we want a true plan. So again, I'm going to hit this top button and again, just pan and zoom. Now when you're doing this, I think it's important to not just get the things that are cut, but also some surrounding context. So you can see I've zoomed out here a little bit, and I'm going to position this as best as I can within the middle of my frame. So that looks pretty good, I think. I'm not too concerned with the shadows at this point. If I was going to do a rendered plan, you might be a little bit more aware of that, but I don't care about those too much. So you want to position it within the middle. Keep in mind that if I close this panel, the middle means all the way from the right edge of your screen all the way to the left. So that looks pretty good to me. Next, I would recommend that you save this scene. So I'm going to come over here to my scenes again. I'm going to come down and hit the plus button. What this is going to do is it's going to set the shadows, the camera position, and any section planes that are currently in the model. So it's going to preserve that. I would also recommend that, especially if you have a lot of them, that you start to name them. So I'm kind of doing a bad job here following my own advice, but this is a plan. So let's click on that and call it plan. Looks pretty good to me. At this point, let's go ahead and do our exports. So remember that when you're doing your exports that you need to come up here and hit save. That's going to save the current view for exporting. So with this, I'm actually going to do 3 exports to get this plan the way that I want it, because I want 3 different line weights or line types. So remember, with your plans, you do what's below the cut, what's cut, and then what's above the cut. So this first export is going to correspond with what is below the cut. So you can see that the section plane is cutting through some stuff, but it's also revealing anything that is below that cut. So that's good. We're going to come up here and go down to Export, DWG, 2D. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to make sure it says full scale. That way it should come in at 1/8 scale. And I'll hit Export. Looks pretty good. Remember, it just says your export has been started. Once you hit export, it doesn't actually give you the file just yet. You have to wait a minute. But while that's going, we can go ahead and do our second export, which is just going to be the things that are cut. So without moving my camera position, I'm going to come up here, again, go to Export, DWG, but instead of doing 2D, I'm going to do Section Slice. What that's going to do is just preserve the things that are cut. Make sure to check full scale and hit Export. Again, my export has been started. I'll wait here a second. Okay, so the first one is done. Just make sure you hit download. And you can see that it actually has downloaded that file. Now, while we're waiting on the second one, what I can do now is I'm going to right click and select Active Cut, which is going to turn off my section cut. So I just went ahead and downloaded the second file. So I have 12 and 13, and maybe try and keep those numbers straight in your head. That way you know which one is which. So 12 in this case would be my first one. So that'll be what's below the cut. 13 will be what is cut. And you can see that now what I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to get in this roof structure, which extends a little bit further outwards from the actual glass walls, let's say, that are cut. So with this, I need to, again, save my view because I made a change. So make sure you hit save. And again, just to be clear, I turned off, or I hit Active Cut to turn off my section plane there. So now that it's saved, I'm going to do a third export. So I'll go to Export, DWG, 2D again, make sure it's full scale, and hit Export. Sweet. So now I have all 3 of them exported, just kind of waiting on this last plan drawing. While that's going, I'm going to go ahead and start Adobe Illustrator. Let's go here and go File, New. And we're going to make our artboard, in this case, 36 inches wide by 24 inches tall. It's a pretty good size sheet, and I'll hit Create. So let's go back now to SketchUp, and now it's done, so I'll hit Download. And again, now that's 14. So again, I have 12, 13, and 14. Let's switch back now to Illustrator. So when we are setting up our artboard, just make sure you have the right dimensions. And the first thing we should do is go to our layers. And by default, you have layer 1. I'm going to go ahead and hit the plus button 2 times to add layers 2 and 3. So this stacking order is going to correspond with our line types or line weights. So the lowest one is going to be the things that are below the cut. So I'm going to double click on that to rename it, and I'll call it below. Layer 2, I'll double click on that and call it cut. And I'll double click on layer 3 and call that above. So when I'm getting ready to place my drawings, it's just critical that I select the layer that I want them to be on. So I'm going to go ahead and do the below the cut layer first. So it's kind of bluish when I select it. I'm going to come up to File, Place, and if I go to my Downloads folder, these 3 should show up for today. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and collapse some of these. Right? So you can see them all right here. So I'm going to do number 12 first. So I'm going to double click on it. Now, it's important that this DWG DXF options comes up because we want to make sure that it's not scaling to fit the artboard. We're going to do original size. And I'm going to hit OK. Fingers crossed. If I click now, I'm going to just go up to this top left corner and click. It comes in at the right scale. Now you can see that it's blue by default. That's not the line color. That just corresponds with the layer color. So this below the layer color is set to blue. You can see the cut layer is set to red, and the above layer is set to green. So you'll see that when I place them, they'll change colors depending on what layer I'm on. So if I click off, you can see that it just gave me the lines, which is good. I have all my lines in there, but they're a little thick, so I'm going to click on it. It also comes in as a group, which is really handy. And what I'm going to do is come in here, I'm going to select 0.5. That looks pretty good. So next, I'm going to go to my cut layer. And it might be a good idea actually to lock the below the layer. That way I don't accidentally move it. So again, I've selected the layer I want the next drawing to come in on, so which is cut. And then go to File, Place again. And we'll do number 13. Original size. Okay, and again, I'm going to click on this top left corner. In this case, it didn't align because it didn't have all of the surrounding context. Not a big deal, but I think it's a good practice to always sort of place them in the same spot. So no worries, I'm just going to move this into the right position. It should snap pretty well. And what I'm going to do now, and I'm going to check these posts here to really make sure that it's perfectly aligned. That's a good spot there. Looks pretty good. Again, just kind of going through and checking some stuff to make sure we're perfectly aligned. So maybe a little bit to the right. So I'm just going to move it off just a little bit and again, just kind of reposition it there. The stroke comes in a little bit thicker than what it did earlier, but that looks pretty good. So next, because these things are cut, I'm going to increase the stroke weight. I like to do 1.5. That looks pretty good, I think. So we can see a little bit of line weight. Let's go 2. So I'll select it. It comes in as a group. I'll just hit the drop down and choose 2. Now, if the other ones are still a little bit too dark compared to it, no worries. I'm just going to lock the cut, unlock below, and let's actually change this to 0.25, so they're even skinnier. So there's just more of a change there in line width so you can really perceive what's cut versus what's not cut. So this is looking pretty good. We have the layer below and the layer that is cut. All that's left now is the above the cut layer. So I'm going to click on that layer to make sure that when I place this file, it goes there. And we'll choose number 14, original size. And in this case, if I click in the top left corner, fingers crossed, it almost lines up, right? So there's a little bit more for some reason, which was in here. It's all good. I have my stairs here, which is easy to align. So if I move this off, you can see there's the top right corner. There's the top right corner as well. So all I need to do is just move it and position it right on top of it. I like to check kind of the top right area, and then I'm also going to check kind of a top lower left area, sorry. And that looks pretty good. So if I click off though, we're getting sort of a weird effect where it looks sort of semi-transparent because of the line weight change. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this. I'm going to change this to 0.5, I think. And I really only want the roof line because that's the only thing that's above the cut, right? These steps technically are below it. So I have some duplicates here, so I'm just going to go ahead and double click to get within this group just like you would in SketchUp, and I'm just going to click and drag over all the lines that I don't want. So I don't want this railing down here, and I don't want any of these steps on the exterior. So now I'm just left with the roof, which is positioned correctly. The only thing now that I need to change is the line type. So it's a continuous line. To change that, I'm going to select it, come over here to the 3 horizontal lines, which is my stroke panel, and then just check the icon for dash line. So when I make the dash line, by default, it's going to come in with these kind of long dashes. I think they're a little bit too long, especially here with the steps. They're so long that you're kind of losing them in the steps. So I'm just going to select it again and change this to something like 3. That way they're much smaller and you can actually perceive those dashes a little bit better. So I think that looks pretty good. So all that's left now is to just reposition them. So I'm going to unlock all 3 of them, click and drag over all 3 groups, and now I have a hold of them and I can reposition them as I want within my artboard. So that looks pretty good to me. Now I have a nice clean plan. Okay, let's go back and do the sections now. So I've done my plan. Let's pull out another section plane. So again, I'm going to come to the tape measure, hit the section plane icon, and in this case, I'm going to lock it in the red direction, and I want it to be lined up right in the middle. So I'm going to find a midpoint here and click to place it. Now I wanted red because it's cutting through the stairs, which I think is a little bit more interesting. Plus, it's showing you all of this stuff which is below the ground as well. So now in this case, I think this wall is a little bit too far back, which is fine. You should be able to go into this group and just click on it and reposition it. So I think it probably should be lined up there with that wall. So that's kind of the nice thing, is that the section plane is sort of showing you some stuff that maybe you forgot to model or you modeled incorrectly. So that looks a little bit better. This isn't editing my plan since I cut at level 2, so we're all good there. Now with the sections, you do have another choice that you didn't make before with the plans, in that I can change the direction. So in this case, I'm looking, let's say, to the right. If I select my cutting plane, I can right click and go to reverse, which is going to keep it in the same position, but now I'm looking to the left. I think I would like to look to the right though, so I'm going to go ahead and reverse it again. And to get it in the correct position, I can sort of like go through these different views until I find the correct one. But I find the fastest way is to actually just right click on this and go to align view. That way you're not worrying about is it the left, the right, the back, or the front. You just find the correct way. Also, if you had a section plane that was at an angle, like at 45 or something like that, these 4 buttons would not correspond with that section view. So I always find that align view is a little bit better. So next I'm just going to position it within the view. That looks pretty good. I want to make sure I get a little bit of stuff to the left and some stuff to the right. In this case, this is the Chicago River, so I want to make sure I get that within the view. So next, it's always a good idea to add a new scene. So I hit the plus button, added a new scene. Let's go ahead and rename it as section. And you'll see that if I click on the plan now, it's going to take me back to that plan cut. I do have this section plane there, which is fine. And then I'm going to click on section, and it will take me back there. Now I do have this line here, which is sort of a leftover from my plan. It's okay. If I go to display here, I have these icons here which can control the visibility of that. So if I toggle section planes, it actually removes those sort of infinite planes while still preserving the cut. So I can actually toggle the cut as well. And you can see it's not cutting through it anymore. Versus if I toggle that back on, it will preserve that cut. So since I moved this, let's go back to my scenes up here and just hit section. And I don't want this to be in my scene. ever. So let's go back here and turn off section planes. And then I'm going to hit the refresh icon here, which is update. Hit OK again. And now if I hit plan, might as well do it here as well. So I'll turn off section planes here, refresh that, hit OK, hit OK. But now if I hit the section scene, that line up here is gone. So this looks pretty good to me. So remember, when you're doing your export, always hit save. Saving it. So with this one, I only have 2 line types or line weights. So I'm going to go to export, DWG. We'll do 2D first and hit export. And then while that's going, let's do it one more time. Export, DWG, and section slice. Full scale, export. Awesome. So now it's just a waiting game here. So I have sort of what's beyond the cut, download there, and then what is cut. So it's going to be 15, which is going to be what's beyond the cut, download, and 16 is what's going to be cut. So I just want to make sure that I put them on the appropriate layer back here in Illustrator. So let's go down to the below the cut layer, which I think is going to be good for the things beyond the cut. Go to File, Place, and that's going to be 15, Place, Original Size. And I'm going to click kind of here for now. That's fine. And I'm going to move this down. That way it's not in the middle of my plan. So it looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and make sure that it's the same line weight. And to do that really quickly, I'm just going to hit the eye, which is the eyedropper tool. And if I click on any of these lines that are on like the below the cut layer, it's just going to mimic, it's basically going to copy the style and weight of it. So you can see I'm getting some weird stuff here because of my tree. It didn't have any lines in it. That's okay. I might have, if I had more time, fixed that, but it's fine for right now. So I'm going to go ahead and lock that layer, click on the cut layer, and go to File, Place. We'll do 16. Original size is fine, and click. And so now you can see when I did this one, it got a little bit more over here to the left than what I want, but that's okay. All I need to do is just reposition these things on top of each other. So again, looking for a clean reference here. I'm going to check it there, and then I'll also check it in a couple other spots. It looks pretty good to me for right now, and I want it to match the line weight up here. So what I can do also is if you have a lot of lines here, just turn off your other layers, hit the eye, and then just sample that, and you can see it kind of bumped up that weight. So if I clicked off there accidentally, you can see it changed it, so I'll click back on that, and it will change it to 2 point up there. So that looks pretty good. Now, this is actually a good opportunity. With this stuff off, I want to make sure I go in here and I clean up any sort of lines that are in between, like the ground and the wall in this case. So I'm just going to click and drag this to there. It should snap, and then drag it over here. Okay. That looks pretty good. I'm going to clean it up here as well. Sorry, there's some announcements going on in the background. Wasn't planning on that. Okay, so just kind of cleaning this up to where it's one continuous flow from these things. So that looks pretty good. Now I do have this extra line here. I think that's its own line. I can go ahead and ideally, okay, not delete it there. I'll just resize that one to there. I have some extra lines out here as well. I think I'm actually going to keep those. That way I can fill this with a color if I wanted to. So I'm going to double click to get out of this, turn my other 2 layers back on. Now we're looking pretty good. So you'll also see, though, that I do have some extra lines in here from my below the layer. So let's go ahead and edit those. So I locked the cut, unlocked below. And in this case, I can just straight up delete these. If I double click in there, I can delete that line. I'm not too worried about it because I have my cut lines above it. So cool. Looking nice and clean. So you can see clearly what's cut versus the things that are not cut. So the only thing that I would fix about these 2 drawings is the fact that the orientation between the plan and the section is not aligned. So generally you want these 2 things to be aligned. So to do that, I'm just going to unlock all my layers and select just the plan here, and then hover over one of the corners and hold shift and rotate it. So that way I can start to align these things together. Now, it's also a good idea at this point, since I've already done all this work, I'm going to go ahead and right click and make this a group. It's going to change it all to one layer, but I've already done the work with my line weight, so I'm not worried about it. So all I'm going to do here is just line up the edge of the roof here with the edge of the roof in the section. They should be perfectly aligned there. You can see that the glass here is lining up as well, and the columns are lining up as well. So I lost my selection there. So if I move this down, you'll see that this wall here is being cut in the section, and there it is in the plan. So that's exactly what we want. So also you can see that my column here is cut in the plan, and there it is in the background of my section. So maybe I'm a little bit off here. I'm just going to move it over just a hair. That's pretty good. So now I'll just hold shift and move it straight up like that. Okay. So the last thing here is just kind of fine tuning where these things are. So I want to show a little bit of the river here. What I'm going to do is click and drag over all that stuff, hold shift to get rid of that. Let's make this one a group as well. And now I have control over just my section. So I'm going to move that up a little bit. And I have control over my plan. And conveniently, they're on 2 different layers, which sort of worked out. So this looks pretty good to me. Now, I don't want the stairs to go through the section, though. So how could I fix that? Well, we're just going to make a clipping mask. So to do that, I'm going to make a rectangle. And I'm just going to click and drag sort of over here and think about where I want the stairs to end. I want to make sure that this clipping mask does not have a stroke. So I'm going to do no stroke. So it looks invisible, but it's there. So now what I'm going to do is click and drag over my plan and my clipping mask, then right click and hit make clipping mask. And it says it's kind of complex. That's cool. Should have worked. Oh, I got rid of my strokes here. Okay, well, this is a bad example. So let's go back then. Before I made this a group, actually. And I'll fix that. So there it is. Okay, so now let's try and do our clipping mask. And this should work. So I'll click and drag here. Maybe to there. That works. And so in this case, I just want a clipping mask between this and the blue layer. So I'll right click and do make clipping mask. There we go. That's what we wanted. So now what I can do again is click and drag over all of this and make it a group. So I should have a hold of all those lines now. Okay, cool. Looks pretty good. So lastly, I've kind of been moving this thing around, so let's align it real quick one more time. I'm actually going to use the column here this time to ensure that that's perfectly aligned. Cool. So now I'll just hold shift and move it straight up. Whoop, wrong one, moving up. So let's move that straight up. Maybe. There we go. All right. And that looks pretty good. Cool. All right, the last thing that you generally want to do is you want to indicate where the section is cut in the plan. So to do that, I'm going to make a really simple section line. So I'm just going to use the line tool. Make sure we're on the above. I could also make another layer here and call it annotations. Okay. I'm going to lock these ones, and I'm going to click and drag, holding shift to make a line. And that looks pretty good to me. You could always be a little bit more specific about like finding the exact center. That's fine. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create these little sort of end caps on this. Let's see, with a little rectangle. That looks pretty good. And I'm going to fill it with black by just clicking and dragging that over. And then I'm going to hold Alt and Shift to move this over to the other end. So again, this is just indicating a couple of things. It's indicating where the section is cut, as well as what direction it's looking with those little rectangles. So I want to go ahead and make those a group. So I clicked and dragged over those, and then I held shift to get that one. Right click, make it a group. So I can always reposition this as I see fit. But I got it pretty well lined up, I think, within the middle there. So that looks pretty good to me. So there we go. I could spend some more time labeling this, but this is just a general overview of how to do your plans and your sections. So if you have any questions, just leave a comment or let me know.